Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Today's guest is a best-selling author. Many of our previous guests of this show have listed him as their inspiration and mentor. He is an alumni, a very early alumni of Epic Realms. Please welcome best-selling author Kevin Hearne back to Epic Realms. Kevin, how are you doing?
Oh, they're great. Thanks for having me back, Nick. Appreciate it.
I love coming and chatting with you. We chatted recently when you were on your tour. We'll talk a bit about that later. Last time you were on this show, one of the things that always stands out to me is we kind of got off topic and we were talking about spirits. And you had mentioned to me that there is this thing called Empress Gin. I asked you one of your favorite things. And now, since then, it's become available in our area. It's spread throughout the US. People can get it all over the place. And now it's my go-to gin. And I was wondering if your tastes have changed since then, or if you have anything new that you've liked to try out, new things you like to do. What's your change up on that? What's new?
The new thing is that I don't drink anymore. I quit in 2022. So what's that give me? I don't know, 2.5 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I drink a non-alcoholic gin called Clever Gin,
Okay.
and it mixes great with any cocktail that you would want to make gin out of,
Okay.
and 0 calories and it tastes great. So I still use, I still make all of the cocktails I
Yeah.
used to make, just make it with a non-alcoholic gin, and I love it.
What's
So
your
there you go.
favorite mix that you throw together with that?
Okay, so it's called a blueberry sagacity, and I've got to find the website address or whatever for it, but I wrote it up because it's actually making a sage syrup
Okay.
and using sage leaves. You clap them in your hand
Yeah.
to release oils and stuff, and then you have blueberries kind of mashed in with it too. So you have this sort of purple drink with some sage in it. So you got this herby feel to it, but also the fruitiness. It's a wonderful combo.
I love it. The reason that we talked about that last time, it was a spin-off because we were talking about your Ink Sigil series, and that's kind of how
Yeah.
that conversation came about. And I
Oh,
thought, what better way than to start with that and kind of work our way in and talk about you finish that series off.
yeah, that
How
was
did
a
that
lot of fun.
feel to get that done? Was it very sad? Was it exciting? What were your thoughts about finishing that series off?
It was really, really sweet for me because it not only finished off Ink and Sigil, it also tied up a ton of different loose threads from the Iron Druid Chronicles. Because the Iron Druid Chronicles left off where Atticus felt he had told his story, but
Yeah.
there was really more to it. And he shows up in the Ink and Sigil series, and we get some resolution on his storylines and so on, as well as, of course, tie everything up with Al McVarish and the curses he's living under. So I was really wrapping up two different, very long series in one book, and it was very satisfying to get it done. And I've been getting lots of folks very happy with how it all turned out. So I'm pleased with it.
That's great. I love that. I loved the just the Al McVarish. I love the take on like spinning it to this other character and still telling some of those little parts of the stories in the back, but it being not Atticus's story. He's there and he's part of it, and we get to see what happens to him. But it's Al's story and it's Buck's story, and with these other characters from the world. So it was really cool to watch that develop throughout that series. So
Well, if you want to look at it this way, this has helped some folks look at it. The Iron Druid Chronicles is about um, facing consequences for your own actions.
mhm.
And then Ink and Sigil is a series about, well, now the consequences are here, and are you going to grow from that, or is it gonna kind of destroy you and have you sink into bitterness or whatever? So it's really about that for both Al because he's been living with consequences, and for Atticus. So, yeah, I found it a really fascinating way to visit some of the older characters while really developing the new ones and having them all kind of meld together. It was a blast for me as a writer.
When you were putting this series of three together, were you doing it with the intent of finishing that off, like, or did you have it plan ahead, like you're the second to last book of the Iron Druid and going, I'm going to do another series after this?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So I hadn't necessarily planned to do um a whole series to finish off the Iron Druid series. That wasn't really my plan,
Mhm.
but I wanted to thematically do some things that were different from Iron Druid and kind of juxtapose them a little bit. So I wanted, Atticus is this character who presents as being 21 or very young 20s the whole time.
Right.
So Ink and Sigil gives us a character who's in his 60s and ready to retire.
Yeah.
And I wanted that very different sort of character, but to say that there are heroes of all ages out there doing important stuff. And that was so yeah, there was a lot of contrast and juxtapositions with Iron Druid that I was playing with there. And then it really dovetailed with the opportunity to um, develop the Iron Druid a little bit more and give him a resolution, um, to all of his troubles there.
Now that it's all done and you look back and you have the Iron Druid Ink and Sigil world, since there's kind of two separate series, they're kind of together. Do you just call it the Iron Druid world? What do you call that universe yourself, just to yourself?
Oh well, it's the Iron Druid universe. I think on the Ink and Sigil books they actually have that on there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a book in the Iron Druid universe, but they are separate series. I mean, the Ink and Sigil series you can read it alone and just sort of take it for granted that this Druid character is out there and he's got a past, and whether you know it or not, he's still gonna move the plot forward. You don't have to have read the Iron Druid first. So. Yeah, however people want to approach it is fine with me. They can start in Ink and Sigil or read all the way from Hounded and keep going.
Nice. So Candle of Crow, it's not your, it's isn't your only recent finale book, right?
Right.
You have another series that you just finished off in the Seven Kennings as well.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
also, that's again another spin, a different. You look at it and you're like, did the same guy write all three of these? Because you see them so differently. And this one blew me away just because of the way the story was told. I don't think I've ever seen anything told quite the way you told the Seven Kennings series, with all the different personalities and perspectives. Tell us a little bit about that. Our audience that might not know the Seven Kennings series, about that series.
Okay. Well, thank you for what you said. I really appreciate it. And I would hope you hadn't read anything like it before because I was trying to do something new. I wanted to contribute something new to epic fantasy and tell a story in a way that hasn't been seen a whole bunch of times before. Multiple points of view are fairly common in epic fantasy. However, it's not usually first person points of view. So I had 22 different first person points of view, which means I had to create 22 different voices that weren't me.
Right.
And that was a project, that was quite something to try to pull off. And when it was actually a book that I had wanted to always write, or a series that I had always wanted to write. I wrote the first book of it before I wrote the Iron Druid, and it was terrible, and it didn't get published. So,
Wait, so this is that book? This is that series?
yeah, the Seven Kennings, the Plague of Giants didn't get published or written until after I'd written 6 Iron Druid books. Okay, but I had actually written a very first draft of it, of a Plague of Giants, before I wrote Hounded. And it was so bad that I I just made a lot of mistakes basically.
Yeah.
But they're good because I learned from them. And then writing the Iron Druid stuff also helped me learn to write different voices. So I mean, there's a part in Hammered where you have these Canterbury Tales sorts of a
Right.
sequence where you have all these very different voices telling little stories within stories, and that was really practice for getting different voices down so that I could properly execute the Seven Kennings and basically tell the story of a war that kind of destroys civilization, and then how do you rebuild afterward when you have a destructive force coming through and upending your country. How do you rebuild from that? And I wanted to tell that from the perspective of people who weren't necessarily the leaders, not your typical protagonists. I wanted to give them give shining starring roles, I guess I should say, to a merchant's daughter, and a hunter who loses his parents and is kind of thrown out all alone in the wilderness, people who don't have natural advantages of power or leadership, and how they are affected and what they can still do to affect change. Okay, so it's relevant to now.
Yeah, it
That
is.
we have, we're witnessing a systematic destruction of society, and how do we come together as people who aren't necessarily in power, to rebuild and make something better from I guess a system that had its flaws if it's able to be
Yeah.
messed up so easily. So yeah, it's I began writing it during the first Orange administration and found it very relevant then, and you know, even more so now.
Yeah.
I think people would take some comfort in it and find lots to love in there. There's 22 different characters to fall in love with. So yeah, I encourage everybody to check it out if they haven't. It's my pride and joy.
There are so many different moving parts. Did you have that stereotypical pin board in the back with yarn for 30 different areas going, okay, in the book here, this is what's going to happen, 2 books from now, but I'm setting the thing here and then, but that's going to be affected by this other thing. How did you put all of those little moving parts together and then get them sequentially in order?
I had to basically get new software to handle it because juggling those parts around in Microsoft Word was just
Mm-hmm.
impossible. Couldn't do it. You couldn't visualize it or see where to go. So I wound up getting Scrivener, and I used Scrivener to write the Seven Kennings. I use Microsoft Word for everything else because it's very simple when you only have 1 or 2 points of view to work with,
Right.
and you don't have a bunch of moving parts to move around. So, but the Plague of Giants, I had to basically say, all right, I've got in this particular book, I have 11 characters. And so each of those characters is probably going to get 4 to 5 chapters for their particular story arc. So Scrivener would allow you to create little tabbed, I guess, folders off to the side, and you could name those little folders for the chapters of every single character. Okay. The reason I did it that way is that it would allow me to make sure I was writing in the same voice for that particular character so that I wouldn't start using the vocabulary of a different character, like character one, when I was writing character two.
Right.
So yeah, I really appreciated Scrivener's ability to separate things out by character, and then you put them in a binder. They have a binder function where you can arrange all the different little chapters from your folders in whatever order you want, and it was easy to move them around and make sure that you were being narratively coherent. So I don't think I would have been able to do it in Microsoft Word.
Yeah.
Scrivener really helped me to keep it.
Something I really love about, say, Sherlock Holmes stories, which are
Yeah,
oftentimes shorter stories, is
yeah,
you get to see all the pieces, you get to see all the clues that Sherlock gets to see, but you don't put the puzzle together. But
yeah,
this is, 3 books long, and not only do you have all of these different characters that are telling these stories and giving you these little bits of information, but you've got someone like the bard telling stuff that happened in the past that are clues, but he only gives you those parts of the story of the past later
yeah.
on in the story. And so I really appreciate getting to see all of those little clues, but not being able to put it together until you put it on there and be like, well, we've already told you what's going on. Here's where it's all put together and what happens. And I really love that. It's so many times I'm like, oh yeah, well, why not? The holy cow, how did I not see that?
Yeah, yeah, so yeah, it's 22 different points of view that also jumps back and forth in time. And when I was when I was writing the third book, the Curse of Krakens was very difficult, and because I had so many parts to juggle at that point. And I had to basically write a timeline of the entire trilogy, not just A Curse of Krakens. I had to do the whole thing to make sure that I was getting my timeline correct and not screwing up. And just getting that done took me 3 months. It was so complex. So but once I had that done, I was like, all right, now I can draft and really get this done. And it was so much fun for me, especially since like a character like that showed up in the third book had also been there in the first book, but she was just like a side character,
Yeah,
and she becomes a narrator. It's Penyas Ben Min, and she was wonderful fun for me to write. She was such a joy because I got to write some little epic poetry from her culture included in her chapters. That was a blast for me.
that's great. When you're writing some of these books, after the Iron Druid, we talked about Iron Druid and how Oberon kind of took off, took on a more than what you expected in the fans' eyes. Was there any characters after that that kind of became more than you were expecting from any of the other books since then?
Uh, the Morrigan turned out to be a lot more popular than I originally expected, and she kind of terrified me,
Yeah,
um,
it's her
and she
job.
should. Yeah, right. And it terrified a lot of folks back in the day, right? So, um, I to find so many people who really enjoyed her and were rooting for her personal journey and how she wanted to basically break free of the roles that had been assigned to her,
Yeah,
and be her own person. There was a lot of folks who connected with that, and I which I deeply appreciated, of course. And so she was a lot of fun for me to write, but also a little bit scary. She was always, to this day, continues to scare me. So because you don't know exactly what she's going to do next. She is very much is her own person and will make her own decisions according to her moral code, but you're not exactly sure where you stand sometimes. So
yeah.
I like that tension.
You mentioned talking about enjoying to write her. Are there any other characters that you enjoyed? You ended up getting in there and writing those characters, and you're like, I really enjoy. I didn't expect this, but this character I really enjoyed writing.
Yeah, in A Curse of Krakens, there's a viceroy named Naren Kusharis, who is this fast-talking fella who has a good heart and is a little bit opposed to the rest of the royal, I guess the court of Garananent. And he wound up being so much fun for me to write. I actually wound up regretting not making him a narrating character. Um, but he was a side character in somebody else's narration, and but just such a delight as a secondary character that I wished I could have, you know, maybe given him a larger role. So there you go. That was one that surprised me. I didn't expect to enjoy him so much.
Maybe a short story down the road to fill in that knack for yourself.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Are there any thoughts of going back and telling other stories there that might not be related to the overall, or maybe going back and writing something beforehand or afterwards in the Seven Kennings world?
I'm not opposed to it, but I don't have any current plans. Right now, I'm doing some shorter works in the Iron Druid universe still, but the Seven Kennings can certainly be revisited. It's a huge world, and there are parts of the world that we never really got to explore. I put them on the map, but we didn't get to go to those countries and see what they were like. Omesh, for example, is one that I think is kind of fascinating world or country, but we never got to go there. So we had to go only where the 22 different characters went. So
Right,
there you
for sure. So you finish up these two series. You put a button at the end of the Iron Druid Chronicles via the Ink and Sigil. Ink and Sigil gets its whole series, finishes that off. Seven Kennings gets done.
go.
What are you doing looking forward after you get done with those, which isn't super long ago? Looking forward, and I know you have some stuff we're going to talk about, but at the time, were you already looking ahead to what you were going to do? Did you already have irons in the fire?
Yeah, right. Currently, I'm writing a mystery. Yeah. A regular mystery with no magic in it, kind of thing. A completely different genre. So, an amateur sleuth,
Okay,
um, set in Toronto. So that's currently what I'm working on and having a good time with it. I'm about two-thirds done, I would say.
okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
That's cool. Uh, Tell us about Horned Lark Press. I almost fumbled over. I did fumble over the words. Horned Lark Press. How did that come about? What was the process of putting that together? Kind of fill us in on that.
Okay, sure. Well, last year, some rights reverted back to me. I'd like for a couple of my older novellas, The Purloined Poodle
Mm-hmm.
and The Squirrel on the Train. They were Oberon's Meaty Mysteries, and Subterranean Press had been publishing them. but the rights came back to me, and so I would need to republish them myself. And I realized that in order to do that, to make them available in print, to make them available, period, in ebook and so on, when they'd been returned to me, I kind of needed a little umbrella under which to do that. So I created Horned Lark Press because I like birds, and horned larks are super cute. But then once I had that done, it was mostly just so that I could self-publish some of my older stuff, just basically make sure it stayed on the market.
Mm-hmm.
Realized that now that I have this infrastructure to do this, why not see if I can maybe publish, something else that I believe in. And so that's where I kind of realized the focus could be on anti-fascism and anti-authoritarianism if we're talking fantasy, because fascism isn't really a concept necessarily in fantasy settings, but authoritarian regimes certainly are. So one way or another, we can address that in our fiction. And how do we deal with these systems and defeat them? Because that's obviously something that's on our minds right now. So I reached out to Lilith Saintcrow and
Nice.
asked her, hey, would you like to write some anti-fascist pulp? Because pulp being something that's really over the top in terms of language and violence and, sometimes sexy times, right?
Right.
Pulp fiction is all of those extreme things, right? Um, but I realized there wasn't a lot of pulp fiction out there in the current market
Right.
that specifically is anti-fascist. And I asked her if she would want to maybe step in and fill that niche. And she's like, heck yeah. So she did a fantastic job. That's basically all I said was, please do me some science fiction or fantasy that is anti-fascist. Stomp some fascists,
Yeah.
please. Just stomp the hell out of them. That's your assignment. Go. And then she wrote Coyote Run. And it is really, really satisfying to read. Imagine that gif of the hero who punched Richard Spencer in the head. That one is like reading Coyote Run is like watching that gif and smiling. So
Yeah.
it's wonderful stuff. Super. It upends tropes. Coyote is not a heroine for the male gaze, and she doesn't suffer fools. She is very foul mouthed, and but she's got this little chewy center underneath all the hard candy shell. You know what I mean? So you work at it a while, and you can find out that she's got this really kind heart underneath it all. So I also have been a fan of Lilith Saintcrow for a long time.
Yeah. How did you two
Uh,
meet?
we've never met in person,
Okay.
but I read her books and said howdy to her here and there on social media, that kind of thing. And then I just wrote her an email one day and said, "Hi, hopefully you know who I am, and I'm not some random person you've never heard of, but yeah, would you like to work with me on this?" And she said yes. And then after that, we hired an editor and a copy editor and a cover artist and all that stuff. No AI was used in any part of the process, and never will be.
Good.
And yeah, she was delighted to take this on, and she just knocked it out of the park. It's the reviews that it's getting are fantastic. Early readers are loving it, and there's just a ton of positive little blurbs from other authors on the website. So it comes out tomorrow, February 25th, or if you're listening to the podcast later, it's out
It's
now.
out. It's out.
It's out now, you guys, and you could buy it in print, ebook, or audio. So
On the
yeah,
cover, in the upper corner, it says "Amazing Tales of Anti-Fascist, Volume One."
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
does that tells me that there is probably going to be a volume 2 or a volume 3 or multiple volumes? Is the
Yeah.
plan the same authors or different authors, or what's the plan with that?
Well, the plan first is to yeah, I guess do well enough that we can have a number two and a number three.
Okay,
Uh, we really hope that there is an audience for this, and it's not just an audience of me who really wanted it.
yeah,
So, um, If it does well, then yes, we will have plenty more and by different authors. So I really wanted to look at, if you check out the art, it is like it's supposed to have the feel of an old time pulp magazine
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah,
And I wanted it to be this sensational, over the top art for each novella, but they would always feel like, oh, this is a new magazine, but it's just one story, a novella length story in every volume. So sometimes they'd be sci-fi, sometimes they'd be fantasy. It depends on the author. Their only guideline is going to be, make it anti-authoritarian and make sure that the authoritarians meet a violent, sticky end. So there you go.
there is a on the cover. There's a gun wrench wielding smacking up the head of a, looks like a skull, maybe, and maybe
Yeah.
a mask.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the art. Tell us a little bit. You were telling me a little bit before we started about the
Yeah.
art on there and the little thing that's there that you were excited about. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll hold it up for folks who are watching the stream, and apologies to folks who can't see this on the podcast later. The art is by Phineas X. Jones. He's a fantastic beer label artist out of Chicago. He does a lot of microbrew beer labels, but he also does other kinds of stuff, posters, all kinds of merchandise. And this is actually his first book cover that he's ever done. But when I looked at his body of work, I realized this guy can just draw anything. He could do whatever you ask him to do.
Yeah,
So anyway, he came up with this. Let me try to get this on here.
there you
This
go.
this fascist that we have here is a clone, and they are wearing masks because they had released a genetic bioweapon plague out across the land, and they're protecting themselves from getting mutated, right? So that's what's going on there. But on the top, or the forehead, I guess, of the skull mask is a lone star with a cross in it, which is the symbol of the fascist regime at the time. So I thought that was a really nice little touch on Phineas's part. I loved it. And also, he did a fantastic job capturing Coyote and Marge, which are the two women there kicking ass. And so um, all of these characters are basically uh, done with approval of the author. She wanted them to look that way, and he's fantastic to work with. I would highly recommend to anybody looking for a cover artist to hire Phineas X. Jones. He's fantastic.
That's great. It also looks a little bit comic booky too. It's like pulp comic as much as
Yeah.
pulp book too. I saw it and I was like, "Is this a comic book?" And I had to look into it and read it a little bit and read the description. Like, okay, it's a novel, but
Yeah.
it looks really cool. When you see it on
Yeah.
the shelf, it makes you want to take it down and look at it.
Yeah, I wanted it to have that old timey pulp magazine feel, and he nailed it. So, yeah, I'm hoping that this is just the first volume of many to come, and we'll have plenty of authors writing for us over the years.
There's something else I wanted to mention real quick, just because we've got a little bit of time, and you came out with it last July, The Hermit Next Door.
Yeah.
Tell us about The Hermit Next Door. How did that come to be? Why did that come to be? Uh, it was just this unique thing that I was like, that's kind of a neat little thing. Let's have Kevin talk about it.
Thank you for asking me about it. I feel like it flew under the radar a little bit. It is a novella that I wrote for Subterranean Press. It's science fiction, and it is one of those things where I'm like, I'm going to write something completely different and batshit, and you don't see coming, and just see if I can pull it off, and have fun with it. But also thematically, it worked in, with some of my very common themes that I've figured out over the course of writing 20 novels, that I write about grief and processing it quite a bit. It's all throughout Iron Druid and Ink Sigil and the Seven Kennings. And this is, a, I actually got a review from Locus Magazine saying that it was a light-hearted romp about grief. And I'm like, okay, I guess it is. I guess it is. I wasn't necessarily aiming for that, but I embrace it. That's a great review. So yeah, if you think a light-hearted romp about grief is impossible, then I challenge you to read The Hermit Next Door and see what you think about it. I don't want to give away the big reveal, you know what I mean? Of
Yeah.
what's really going on there. So it's tough to talk about it, but basically a widow and her son are racked by grief over the passing of the husband slash father, and they're from Tennessee. They move all the way out to the Oregon coast, or just off the coast, to start over again and not be constantly reminded of what they lost. But when they move in, the hermit next door turns out to be somebody who's not exactly from around here. So things kind of take off once they meet him. So and then they have decisions to make. And the decision that she winds up making at the end is one that I go back and forth on myself. I don't, obviously she made her choice. I'm not sure that I would make the same choice that she did 100% of the time. I go back and forth on whether I would make the same decision she made. So I think it's something fun for folks to talk about once they see what she does, and wonder if they would act the same way or choose a different path. So the audiobook for this, by the way, is brilliant as well. If you're an audiobook fan, it's narrated by Annalise Scott and it's beautifully done. So yeah, I hope you guys will check it out. The
Yeah,
Hermit Next Door, a lot of fun. It's available
definitely.
in print, ebook, and audio. So there you go.
So you bounced from genre to genre a lot, right? You're Iron Druid's kind of urban fantasy, and then you get the Seven Kennings, which is a little bit more like high fantasy.
Mhm.
You get the science fiction. You mentioned a mystery. Are you changing genres just because you want to write them? Are people
Yeah.
like, hey, you should do this? Or kind of tell us about that, and what is your process shifting gears from one genre to another?
Well, yeah, I want to see if I could do it. I want to challenge myself as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
I want to tell stories in different genres. The I wouldn't have written the epic fantasy if I didn't feel like I could contribute something new to the genre. And in writing the science fiction, the Hermit Next Door, I'm like, nobody has written this particular kind of creature before. So I wanted to always try to do something a little bit different. So that's kind of what draws me to trying new stuff. And I've been uh, having fun trying out this new genre for me for writing a mystery. I've been watching lots of crime dramas and so on and so forth, and I'm like, well, how can I put my own spin on this and do my thing and entertain folks and have a good time. So that's what I'm currently working on. Yeah.
We've been watching a lot of Only Murders in the Building
Oh,
personally
that's great.
for us. What could you mention? Well, you've been watching a lot of crime dramas. What are you watching? What's kind of been some of your inspirations for that?
Uh, at the moment, there's this Canadian one called Saint Pierre,
Okay.
and it's about a French island. It's actually like a colony or of a possession or whatever of France, off the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador. So it's a French speaking island, and it's about this tiny police department that's on this island that winds up being this weird place for crime because if you clear customs at this island off the coast of Canada, you actually are then able to take a domestic flight to Europe. It's not an international flight anymore because you've actually crossed into France by going to this island. So I found that kind of a fascinating thing. And I've also found it amusing, though, the process of some of these TV shows. They always have cork boards, and they're posting up pictures and they're just putting up together this narrative really quickly for the purpose of the time limits on their show, I
Right.
guess. Here's our suspects and here's what we know about them. And but I'm like, who cut out all those pictures and printed those pictures of the suspects? And you've got them neatly labeled. You've got all of this stuff ready at your fingertips so you can go through your dramatic exposition here. Who did all that? I just start wondering about things like that. But yeah, I'm having police procedurals are things that I've been watching, but I have no intention of ever writing. I'm very much into writing an amateur sleuth, so that he has to work outside the bounds of the police. And he is also not a private investigator, so he doesn't have access to that. He has to find a different way to solve the mystery. And so that's been a challenge and also a lot of fun for me.
How do you see the differences in laying out a story for a urban fantasy, for a fantasy, for a sci-fi, for a mystery? When you're putting those together, are the layouts different? Is the direction, the way that you tell the story, and the pacing change for each of those for you personally?
It does. It's very different. I mean, for a mystery, you have to know who did it. You know, from the beginning, you have to work backwards, put in clues and false leads and all this other kind of stuff. So that's a very different process for me. Writing an urban fantasy is something that you can sort of just kind of go. You can start at the beginning and just go and have an adventure. It's much simpler, because as long as you know who your characters are and where they're supposed to go or grow, as long as you know that, then you could just have fun with the monsters and outside conflicts that really spur them to grow internally. Okay, so that is much simpler for me, is to write urban fantasy. And then I find epic fantasy, with the structure that I was choosing and all that, and the themes I was exploring, was much more complex and fun. With sci-fi, it's also a matter of looking at how are the characters that you have, how are they going to grow uh, during the course of this, and the plot is basically there to show us how they will grow. It's a sci-fi plot, but it's all there to um, inspire some sort of internal revelation within our characters. So yeah, I do take a slightly different approach to all of that. And doing different stuff, I think, is necessary for me. If I had to do the same thing over and over, I'd get bored.
Yeah,
So one of the things, I used to be an English teacher, and one of the things I loved about teaching was that no day was the same. You
right.
never had this, even if you're teaching Romeo and Juliet 4 years in a row, the way the kids react to that play and it is never going to be the same. So I get very bored with sameness, and I don't have a writing routine to say, so to speak. Every day for me as a writer is also different, because if I get into a rut, that's killer for me. I have to change things up. So sometimes I write during the morning, sometimes at night, and I write in different places and different music, et cetera, et cetera. Just whatever works for you, though. There's no right way to do any of that. And so I never give writing advice really, except to just do your own thing. Whatever gets you to the end, that's perfect.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
seem to inject quite a bit of humor, and obviously we're chatting here, we're smiling, we're having fun.
Yeah.
And you've done humor books. You did the books with Delilah, and but all of your books have a little bit of humor in them. Do some of these new ones have a little bit of that humor injected in there as well, whether it's the mystery or the sci-fi or the
Yeah.
those
I
books?
think so. I mean, it's a little bit different, more situational.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and by the way, if any of you guys are interested, here's me going off on a tangent.
Go off on a tangent. That's what we're here for.
I am fascinated by a show on Netflix right now called The Hot Spot, and it's a Japanese series, so you'll be reading subtitles, but it's a completely different kind of humor from American or British comedies. It's very situational. There's never a single joke told. It's um, it's a comedy really of manners and expectations, and but I find myself cackling out loud at this thing in a way that regular comedies that I'm used to don't do anymore. I'll laugh at a joke here and there, but this one just has me kind of howling. So I recommend The Hotspot if you guys want to try out a different kind of comedy. Maybe it won't be your bag of chips, but it's worth a try to see, because it just kind of builds slowly, and then yeah, this guy, he's an alien, and but he doesn't look like an alien at all, and he's trying to convince somebody that he is, and that situation wound up really making me giggle. So
It's really
have at
interesting that a lot of comedy that
it.
we're not used to, you'll
Yeah,
be watching it and like at first you're like this might be dumb or I don't get this, but then as you watch you're like okay, this is genius. And the more you watch it the better it gets until you're telling everybody how amazing a show is or a comedian or a genre or a book really is. And then you're always like just watch the first episode, just read the first few, just get used to it first.
yeah,
Trust me,
yeah.
trust the process.
Yeah, exactly. It does about halfway through the first episode of the Hotspot. It really starts, like, these characters that they've built up. They start. you know, the conflict begins, I guess. And when that does, it's hilarious. So yeah, I just have a great time with humor in general. I just can't help it. It helps me. It helps me cope with the world.
Yeah. You went on tour recently with some author friends of yours, Chuck Windig, Delilah Dawson. We've had Delilah on the show. Hopefully, we'll get
Mhm.
Chuck here on down the road. But your guys' chemistry and the fun you all seem to have on this entire tour really showed. Whether it's social media posts or anybody who went to any of the events live and got to see just the banter back and forth was a lot of fun for me to watch and follow. How was it for you being there with them, all of those days and going to see all these cool locations? How was that event?
Yeah, we had the best time together. We always do. We've toured several times together, and it's just we all bring in slightly different groups of fans because we all write different stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
we have just a blast together going and seeing things, and we're very chill about going and doing. We all like birds, we like apples, we like nature, and seeing fun stuff. So we wind up doing a lot of that while we're out together. We visited a huge arboretum in the Chicago area, the Morse Arboretum, or Morton's Arboretum. I think the Morton Salt folks have this huge, place
Oh, okay.
in Chicago with trees from all over the world. And of course, a lot of birds, and there's a hedge maze to get lost in. So we just had a great, there's a cheese castle in Wisconsin we had to go
I
to.
was going to ask you about the cheese castle.
Yeah. So, we just go do some fun stuff on our way to checking things out. So, yeah, we were trying to go to this one restaurant in Madison and couldn't find a parking space in downtown Madison. So we're like, oh, you know what? Let's just go to this, back to the hotel instead and just have dinner there. And it was wonderful. It was perfect. So, we're very easy going together, and I think that's one of the best things about it. So. Um, we're hoping we get to tour again someday.
Yeah, that would be great. Who kind of
Yeah.
put that whole thing together this last trip? Was that you? Was it Chuck? Was it Delilah? Who's like
Yeah,
spearheading
it
the
was
entire trip?
it was me for that one because it was coinciding with the release of Kindle and Crow. So that was what was going on there. We were talking about maybe trying to do something this year, with later on this year, maybe in the summer or something, but well, maybe in the UK because we would love to go to the UK
Yeah,
and check it out together. But we will have to see if we can arrange something with the bookstores and publishers over there.
that would be great and awesome. When you came here to Minnesota, I
Hmm.
asked a question, and I'm going to ask it again for our
Okay.
audience, and
All
whether or not the answer is the same or whether or not the answer is different. I had asked
right.
that you and Delilah had worked together on a book. What are the
Mhm.
You guys had mentioned that you were chatting fun about it on the road about the three of you working together on a project, but nothing solid. Has that developed any further since then? That conversation.
Oh,
And if you can't answer, you can just say I can't talk about it. That's fine. But I gotta
no,
ask.
it hasn't, but I mean, we do. We're driving along the road and we just start riffing on stuff and start talking about it. But we never really find the time to do it because we each have our own projects, and trying to carve out time to do something together is rough. So what we've managed to do is do the collections that we've put out, collections of novellas that are themed. And again, it follows the idea that we just want to do something that hasn't been done before. So with Death and Honey, we were trying to, or I'm sorry, there was the first one was Three Slices. That is the world's first anthology about cheese wizards. And so, yeah, so that was a blast for us to do. Then we did the thematic thing with honey and a murder of some kind in Death and Honey. And then Canines and Cocktails, the theme is obvious there too. So we each wrote about a dog and a drink. So in our novellas, and it was a lot of fun.
Well,
That Canines and Cocktails, by the way, Delilah's novella in that is basically like a prequel to a novel she has coming out next year. So yeah,
oh,
it's pretty
okay,
cool.
okay. We'll have
Yeah.
to. Hopefully, I'm hoping to get her back on. I'm talking to her people. We'll see how that turns out. But speaking about all of those books, Tell us about Oberon's bath time stories. We didn't even talk about it yet.
Oh my gosh.
We got to
Okay, yeah.
talk about the bath time stories because I know everybody wants
That's
to
right.
hear the bath time stories, and the cover art just makes me chuckle.
Yeah, and it was done by the same guy who did Coyote Run. Phineas X. Jones did it. But the bath time stories were a theme throughout or something that happened. It's a little set piece that happened in a lot of the Iron Druid novels. At some point, Atticus would give Oberon a bath and tell him about a historical figure, and then Oberon would be obsessed with that historical figure for the rest of the book. So I thought, well, what if I did that as short stories um, that he gets a new bath and a new historical figure each time, but that will be a newsletter story that I can send out to paid subscribers for wordsandbirds.ink. So I did that. I had 12 new short stories come out to my paid subscribers last year. And then what I'm doing is at the beginning of, this year, I've collected them all into one volume, and Luke Daniels has already recorded the audiobook. So it will be out on April 8th. So if you would like to pre-order it now, you can. People who subscribed to it last year, who like basically paid me to write them, they're going to get a free audiobook. So they'll be getting a free download soon. So the same deal is in effect this particular year. I'm not writing Oberon's stories this year. I am writing Iron Druid stuff this year. The first one had Atticus reunite with the Morrigan, and that went out at the end of January, and I'm just about to start the next story now because it has to go out at the end of the week. So I'm doing that all year. If you guys want to join in on that and subscribe, it would support me through the year. You get a new story every month in your inbox, and then next year you'll get an audiobook of what I produce. So yeah, that's been a lot of fun for me because it's not only the fun challenge of writing a new story and doing the fun historical work, but it's also a way for me to kind of experience what serial fiction is like because I've never really done it before.
Right.
But that used to be actually the way most authors made their living.
Right. Speaking of Sherlock
Uh,
Holmes, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. If you look at the majority of, I guess, publishing, the novel is a fairly recent development. It was very much shorter works that used to dominate, and writers would make their living by selling to magazines and newspapers and such, and not so much have giant thick volumes,
Yeah.
um, books to sell. So because printing, of course, was very, very expensive, and so the way to get the most copies in the most hands was to print stories in on very cheap newsprint. So there you go.
Looking forward to
Um,
that.
I have a lot of fun doing that. So I appreciate everybody supporting me on wordsandbirds.ink.
Everyone go check that out. Do you have any other projects coming up you want to talk about that maybe we haven't covered? Anything new coming
Uh,
out or things
I've
you're
got
working on?
one. I got a couple of things that I can announce that, they're stuff that's coming out in anthologies
Okay.
that'll be out next year. One is called, it's edited by Carrie Hughes and Jim Butcher. And it has pretty much every big name in urban fantasy in it, it seems like to me. And it is called Paranormal Payback. So every author takes a character from their particular urban fantasy
Yeah.
worlds and writes basically a revenge story.
Okay.
So I have chosen the witches from the Iron Druid Chronicles, the Polish witches, the sisters of the three Auroras,
Mm-hmm.
and I've written a story set in Warsaw and had a bunch of awesome folks from Poland help me out with the history there of their very interesting city. And I kind of got obsessed with Polish tea rooms as a result. So there you go. That's all I can tell you about that. But that'll be out next January. So a little less than a year from now, you'll be able to get Paranormal Payback with my story in there about the Polish witches in Warsaw. And then I also have a story that is completely new stuff. And that is going to be in a book called Unavowed, edited by Sean Speakman. And that will be also be out next year. They ran it as a Kickstarter. It fully funded in, like 3 days or something like that,
Great.
something ridiculous. And I just got done. I sent it off today. In fact, I signed a whole bunch of signature sheets for the special edition, the limited edition, where every author in the anthology has signed it. So I sent it on to the next author to sign today. So that's pretty cool. So if
That
you
is
guys
cool.
want to look at it, yeah, you can check it out.
I'll
Unavowed.
check it out for
Yeah.
sure. Upcoming appearances, autograph signings. I know you said you're maybe hoping to do some stuff in the UK. Maybe you've got
Yeah.
CanCon coming up, right?
Yeah. CanCon will be in October. If you guys want to come to Ottawa and hang out in Canada for a bit and see what it's like and meet a bunch of nice Canadian folks and a bunch of American guests that come up, yeah, it's a great con to attend. Also, if you guys ever want signed books from me, you can always call Perfect Books in Ottawa. They will hook you up. I will sign books and they will ship them to you wherever you are in the world. Also, on my website, there is a spot for you to just ask for signed bookmarks. There's a little form you fill out. It goes to my wife, and then she basically brings book plates for me to sign, and we mail it to you. It doesn't cost you anything. It's free. We just let you request a bookmark because or a book plate because I know that you can't always come to see me in person. So it's a little something I just do so that folks can feel loved. I do love y'all.
That's great. Of course, people can check out kevinhearne.com to
Yeah.
get that information. Of course, hornedlarkpress.com. We talked about that earlier. Wordsandbirds.ink. And of course, people can find you on Blue Sky at Kevin Hearne. There's an E at the end of that, people. There's an E at the end of that if you didn't know.
Yeah. Kevin Hearne, kevinhearne.bsky.social, I think is what it is. But yeah, it's one of those. Yeah.
Yeah, right on
I
there
post for pretty regularly. So
for sure. Kevin, thank you so much for being here. Anybody in the live stream, we will get to your questions in a moment. If you haven't, throw your questions in those live stream chats and we will get to them here in a bit. Everybody
yeah.
who is listening to the podcast, coming up next, we're going to be having writer and game designer. She's a Diana Jones nominated designer. Allison Sybee is going to be joining us. She's worked on RPGs such as Fallout, D&D, Pathfinder, and more, not to mention her novels. She joins us March 10th, and that podcast will be available on March 11th. Also, still to come, author James Sutter is going to be returning to Epic Realms. We're going to be getting Bruce Nesmith is going to be joining us, as well as legendary comic book writer Jim Zub is going to be joining us here on the show. So please follow, like, rate, review, all of those things. It helps us and helps our guests. And of course, as I said, go and check out hornedlarkpress.com. Coyote Run comes out tomorrow or today if you're listening to the podcast. So
Yeah.
for
For sure.
Kevin
Check
Hearne,
out.
I am Nick. Thank you guys all for listening to Epic Realms.